Wyoming Territory, October 1874. The wind came howling down from the north as Kenzie Whitlow fell to her knees in front of the barn, her worn skirt soaked and clinging to her legs, her arms barely strong enough to brace her fall. Her breath puffed white in the cold air and her vision swam. She had not eaten in 2 days. Behind her, the cabin stood empty just like it had since the day her husband rode off and never came back. The barn door creaked open fast. A man stepped into the doorway, tall and broad-shouldered, with a rifle slung across his back and hay clinging to the sleeves of his coat. His eyes locked on her without hesitation. "Ma'am," he said, voice low and steady. Kenzie tried to speak, but all that came out was a rasp. Then the world tilted and she collapsed. Strong arms caught her before she hit the frozen ground. She felt the warmth of him as he lifted her, the way he moved quickly but careful, like someone who knew pain and did not want to add to it. Inside the barn, it was warmer, the air thick with the scent of horses and straw. He laid her down on a pile of hay, pulled a wool blanket from a hook on the wall, and wrapped it around her. "You are safe," he said simply, kneeling beside her. "My name is Elias Evers. I will get you water." Kenzie blinked up at him, her lips cracked, her heart pounding not from fear, but from the shock of kindness. He returned with a tin cup and lifted it to her mouth. She drank, slow and careful. Then he sat down beside her, not asking anything more, just waiting until she could speak. "I am sorry," she whispered hoarsely. "I thought the barn was empty. I did not know someone was here." "It is not my barn," Elias said. "I was just passing through. Storm caught me. I found this place last night." She nodded slowly. "It was my husband's land. He left. Been gone near 2 months now." Elias did not comment. He just studied her, jaw set, eyes calm but firm. "You alone?" Kenzie looked away. "No. I have 2 children. Elam and Elsie. I left them with a neighbor this morning. I went to town for flour, found nothing, and came back with nothing." Her voice broke. Elias stood and stoked the small stove in the corner of the barn. He moved like someone who worked with his hands every day, someone who did not need to speak to fill the space. "You need rest," he said. "Lie down. I will keep the stove going." She looked at him again, really looked this time. His coat had patches on the elbows. His boots were worn, but shined. His hair was dark, his brow furrowed like he had not laughed in a while. But his voice made her feel like she could breathe again. "I do not even know you," she said quietly. "You do not need to," Elias replied without hesitation. "Not tonight." Kenzie watched him as he pulled a small tin from his bag and set a few dried strips of meat on a plate, placing it beside her. He offered no words of sympathy, no promises, just real things: warmth, food, a place to rest. She took one piece with trembling fingers and chewed slowly, the salt biting her cracked lips. Her eyes filled with tears, but she did not let them fall. Elias sat down a little distance away, leaning against a wall of hay bales. He did not pry, did not push. He just sat there, watching the stove flame flicker, like he had all the time in the world. Kenzie pulled the blanket close and let her eyes close for the first time in days. And for reasons she could not name, her heart stopped racing. She slept. When she woke, the light coming through the cracks in the barn walls was soft and golden. Morning. Kenzie sat up, surprised to find her body not aching as much as it had the night before. The blanket was still around her, the stove still warm. Elias was outside, splitting wood beside the barn. His coat hung open, revealing a shirt patched at the shoulder. His movements were steady, purposeful. She stepped out quietly and stood near the doorway. "You should have let me go back home," she said. Elias looked over at her. "You were not strong enough to walk. You are better now." She nodded. "Better enough." He set the axe down, wiped his brow with his sleeve. "I will walk you back." "You do not have to," she said. "I know," he replied, and that was that. The walk to her homestead was silent for a while. The wind had died down, but the air was sharp. Kenzie tucked her hands into her coat sleeves. Elias walked beside her, rifle over his shoulder, eyes scanning the road like he had done it 100 times. "You have a family?" she asked softly. "Did," he said. "Long time ago. Wife and daughter. Fever took them." Kenzie's steps slowed. She glanced up at him, the ache in her chest mixing with something else. Something tender. "I am sorry," she said. He nodded. They reached her cabin just as Elam came running from the side field, where he had been helping the neighbor with firewood. He stopped short at the sight of Elias, eyes wide, protective. "This is Elias," Kenzie said quickly. "He helped me. I was not feeling well." Elias knelt down, eye level with the boy. "You are Elam?" Elam nodded warily. "You take care of your sister?" "Yes, sir," the boy said. Elias nodded once. "Good." Elsie came out next, her blonde curls bouncing under her knit cap. She ran to Kenzie and clung to her leg, not noticing the stranger right away. Kenzie scooped her up, holding her close, her heart full and aching. "You are welcome to stay for supper," Kenzie finally said, voice low. Elias glanced at the sky. "Only if I help." Kenzie looked at him, really looked. And for the first time in a long time, the fear in her chest eased. Something about him, his quiet steadiness, the way he had not asked anything from her made her feel like she could breathe again. "All right," she said softly. "You can help." He smiled, just a little. Not wide, not bold. But it reached his eyes. And inside her chest, something warm bloomed. The stew simmered over the hearth as dusk settled in. Kenzie stood by the stove, sleeves rolled to her elbows, stirring slowly with a wooden spoon while Elsie dozed on a pallet near the fire. Elam sat at the table, shelling dry beans with a quiet focus that had grown into him early. Elias was outside, checking the lean-to for holes before the next snow. His coat had been left on a peg and his rifle leaned against the doorframe within reach. Kenzie ladled the stew into bowls, her hands steady now. Hunger still rode the edges of her bones, but the hollowness had lifted. She glanced out the window and caught the shape of Elias returning, his step weighed down with the purpose of someone who never moved idly. When he stepped inside, the warmth hit him full in the face. He closed the door gently and took a seat without speaking. The silence was not uneasy. It had shape to it like something built instead of left behind. "You find much rot in the lean-to?" Kenzie asked, setting a bowl before him. "Just one beam soft at the base," he said. "I braced it with what was left of the old fence rail. It'll hold a while yet." Elam passed him a slab of bread without being asked. Elias accepted it with a nod and turned toward the boy. "You ever work a forge?" Elam shrugged. "Watched a smith once in town. He let me pump the bellows." Elias chewed thoughtfully, then said, "You're built for it. Strong wrists. Good eyes." Elam straightened, pride flickering in his face, and looked to his mother. Kenzie gave the smallest nod of approval, a flicker of warmth lighting her features. After the meal, Elias helped Elam carry water in from the well while Kenzie cleared the table. She moved with practiced care, her limbs no longer trembling from fatigue but still measured as though her body remembered what it meant to be too tired to stand. When the door opened again, snow was dusting Elias's shoulders. He stepped inside, shaking it off with a grunt. "Cold's coming in sharper," he said. "You'll want to bank the fire deep tonight." Kenzie nodded, then hesitated. "You passing through to Green River?" "North of there," he said. "Toward the Grove Entre Range. I'd heard about a mine needing hands." "You mine?" "I have," he said. "Don't prefer it." She leaned against the hearth, arms crossed, and studied the man who had lifted her from the dirt without question. "Why not? Underground's no place for someone who likes the wind," he said quietly. "Hard to breathe in places where the sky's been buried." Kenzie's gaze dropped to the floorboards. Her fingers gripped the edge of the mantel. "You'll ride out tomorrow?" Elias looked over at her. "If that's what's needed." She didn't answer right away. The fire popped, casting long shadows that danced across the walls. "Elsie wakes at dawn," she said instead. "You'll hear her before the rooster crows." "I don't mind early," he replied. She moved to the window then, the frost creeping up the glass, and stared out toward the trees, where the wind whispered through bare branches. Behind her, Elias set another log on the fire and banked it carefully, just as she'd asked. That night, he slept in the barn again. Not because she asked it of him, but because he understood something had to be built slow. Trust was not a thing to be demanded. Before dawn, Kenzie found him tending to one of the horses. He moved with quiet efficiency, brushing down the mare with long strokes, the lantern casting a golden halo over his shoulders. "She's taken to you," she said, stepping inside. "She's got a calm eye," he replied. "Gentle animals don't spook easy." Kenzie stepped closer, slipping her hands into her shawl. "You said you'd been north, but your coat's lined for Texas weather. You come from that way?" "Originally," Elias said. "Born near San Saba. Rode out before the war ended." She absorbed that. "And after I drifted," he said. "Didn't find much to stay for." Her gaze lingered on him. "Maybe you weren't looking in the right places." Elias turned toward her then, really turned, like she'd said something he hadn't expected. The quiet stretched between them, not sharp, but full. "I was tired of digging," he said at last. "Everywhere I stopped, I kept finding graves." Kenzie's throat tightened. She reached out, brushing a bit of hay from his sleeve. Her fingers rested there longer than needed. "You didn't find one here," she said. "No," Elias answered. "I didn't." The sun rose soft over the ridge behind them, casting pale light across the snow. Inside the barn, the warmth between them held steady, like something that had taken root. Neither of them moved for a long time. A week passed, quiet and cold, the sky hanging heavy with the kind of gray that warned of deeper winter. The cabin had taken back its rhythm with stacked-in neat cords, the stove burning steady, the children sleeping full-bellied. Elias hadn't spoken once of leaving again. Kenzie stood outside with her hands deep in her coat pockets, watching the frost melt slow off the roof shingles. The sun had broken through in patches, throwing gold across the snow, and she let it warm her cheek as she listened to the soft clatter of Elias working behind the barn. He'd taken to mending what her husband had left undone: hinges, troughs, the sagging fence that ran along the east pasture. She stepped around the corner just as he dropped a bundle of cut cedar slats. "You always work without gloves?" she asked, glancing at his reddened knuckles. He flexed his fingers once, then wiped them on his trousers. "Can't feel the nails proper with 'em on. You'll get frostbite." "Likely," he said. "But the gate closes now." She crouched beside him, picking up one of the slats, running her thumb along its edge. "You shaped these yourself?" "Had to," he said. "Store-bought ones don't last through wind this sharp." Kenzie handed him a slat. "You always fix what's not yours?" He took it, but didn't answer right away. "I don't mind the work." Still not an answer. Elias looked at her, really looked. "Maybe it's a way to stay still without admitting I want to." She stood slowly. "Then stay." He blinked once, his breath fogging in the cold. "You sure you mean that?" "I wouldn't say it if I didn't." She folded her arms, shoulders drawn back. "I know how to get by on my own, but I don't want to keep doing it like that." Elias stood too, brushing sawdust from his trousers. "I've got nothing to give you, Kenzie. Not land, not money. Just hands that remember how to build and a back that's been broken more than once." She stepped closer, her boots crunching over the brittle grass. "I've got enough land for us both. And I don't need money. I need someone who doesn't scare easy." He let out a slow breath. "And the children? They already look for your boots by the door." Elias looked down at the slat in his hands. "I was never a father." "They don't need a perfect man," Kenzie said. "They just need one who stays." He nodded slowly, like each thought needed time to settle before it could be spoken. "I can stay." She reached for his hand, cold and rough, and held it between hers. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. The truth of it was already there in the quiet air between them. Later that day, Elias carried the last of the cedar slats to the shed. Inside, Elam was sorting nails by length, lips moving as he counted under his breath. Elias set the wood down and crouched beside him. "You've got an eye for detail," Elias said. Elam didn't look up. "Mama says I take after my grandfather. He used to fix watches." "That's so." Elias picked up a square nail and turned it in his fingers. "You ever use a brace and bit?" "No. but I seen one used. I'll show you tomorrow. You'll be drilling holes better than me by supper. Elam glanced up then, brows raised. You're staying. If your mother'll have me. Elam nodded, then returned to his sorting like nothing more needed saying. That night, Kenzie sat on the cabin step, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Elias joined her without a word, sitting close enough their arms touched. I used to think quiet meant something was missing, she said softly. But now it just feels like room to breathe. Elias didn't speak, only reached for her hand beneath the blanket, fingers finding hers. She leaned her head against his shoulder and watched the stars blink into being, one by one. Inside, the fire burned low and the children slept deep. The gate was mended. The cold would hold for weeks yet, but the air between them felt steady. Kept? Known. The first snow came before morning, thick and slow, blanketing the yard by the time a faint light crept through the cabin's eastern window. Kenzie stood at the table, cutting strips of muslin for a new flour sack, her fingers stiff but certain. She'd stitched by lantern most nights since she was 16, but something about the quiet beside her now made the rhythm easier. Elias sat across from her, mending the hem of Elam's coat with long, even stitches, his brow low over the needle. You learned to sew in the war? She asked, not glancing up from her work. I learned out of necessity, he said. Tried to pay a woman once to fix a tear in my boot, and she said if I had hands, I ought to use 'em. Kenzie's lips lifted slightly. Sounds like a woman I'd get along with. She ran a boarding house near Fort Smith. Used to beat the rug with a paddle when men got loud after dark. Kenzie folded one strip of muslin into the basket and met his eyes. You stayed there long? Only long enough to finish healing. He tied off the thread and leaned back. She said I walked like I was still carrying a musket. Kenzie reached for another length of cloth. You don't walk that way now. Only when it storms, he said. Joints remember what bones forget. Outside, the wind caught the edge of the barn roof, whistling through the loose boards Elias hadn't reached yet. Kenzie stood and crossed the room to check the latch on the door, then paused when she saw Elam crouched near the woodpile, a rabbit cradled in his arms. She opened the door and stepped onto the porch. Elam, she called gently. He turned, shoulders hunched. She was stuck in the trap, but she ain't hurt bad. Kenzie stepped closer, brushing snow from the hem of her skirt. Set her down. Let me see. The rabbit's leg was scraped, but not broken. Blood matted the fur near the joint, but the small body trembled with life. Elias appeared beside them, wrapping a handkerchief around his palm before lifting the creature with care. I can splint it, he said. Won't run for a while, but she'll mend if she's kept quiet. Kenzie nodded. We'll keep her in the shed till she's steady. Elam looked up at Elias. You ever fix animals before? Some, he said. But mostly I watched an old man do it. He said a wounded thing fights hardest when it's held too tight. Kenzie watched Elias carry the rabbit toward the shed, Elam trailing behind him with soft steps. She pressed her hand to the porch post, the wood cold under her fingers, and listened to the sound of her son's voice asking questions she didn't need to answer anymore. Later that afternoon, Elsie sat at the hearth, piecing together scraps of yarn into a braid. Kenzie worked beside her, darning a hole in a wool sock, while Elias stood near the window, carving a handle for the broken drawer in the kitchen chest. The room smelled faintly of lye soap and cedar, the windows fogged from the heat inside. You ever think of farming? Kenzie asked without looking up. I planted corn in Oklahoma once, Elias said. So dry the crows choked on the dust. Here it's better come spring, she said. Soil holds water if you dig past the clay. I've got a row of apple saplings out back, planted just before. She stopped, needle paused mid-stitch. Elsie looked up, but said nothing. Elias set down the carving knife. I can help when thaw comes. You'd want to? She asked. I've worked land that wasn't mine before, he said. Didn't change how it felt in my hands. Kenzie met his gaze. It would be yours, if you stayed. Elias walked to the table, picked up the sock she'd set down, and turned it over in his hands. Most men don't know what to do with the things they're given. I'm not most men, he added quietly. Kenzie nodded. I know. That night, snow piled against the windows, and the wind moaned low through the trees. After the children were asleep, she stepped outside with Elias to check the coop. The chickens huddled close, feathers puffed, but safe. As they turned back toward the cabin, she reached for his hand without thinking. He didn't speak, just curled his fingers around hers, a quiet surety in the gesture. Inside, the fire still burned. The cabin smelled of pine and ash. Their boots left twin trails in the snow behind them, leading to the same door under the same roof. And neither of them let go. By early December, the snow had hardened into a crust over the fields, and the days shortened into a quiet hush that held the land in place. Smoke curled steady from the chimney, and inside the cabin, the days turned toward rhythm wood cut and stacked, meals made from what stores remained, hands always busy with something that mattered. Elias had begun building a smokehouse just beyond the coop, working with what timbers they had pulled from the collapsed lean to near the treeline. Kenzie watched from the cabin window as he measured each beam by eye, shoulders bent with purpose. He hadn't asked for help, but she brought him hot cider at midday, wrapped in a wool shawl. Got a reason for it? She asked, handing the tin cup to him. He took it, nodding once. Neighbor offered a hog in trade for fence work. Wouldn't do to waste it. You didn't tell me. I hadn't decided yet, he said. Didn't want to take meat I couldn't keep. She leaned against the post beside him. What made you decide to build it? Elias looked toward the cabin, where Elam was stringing dried corn over the windowsill for the birds. I started thinking about next winter. And the one after that. Kenzie held his gaze. That's a long way off. Not if it's the same people I'm planning it with, he said. She touched the edge of his sleeve, her hand stilling on the worn fabric. You think of this place as yours now? I think of it as ours, he said. She nodded once, slow and sure, and for a moment neither of them moved. The wind stirred through the trees, carrying the sharp scent of pine and cold ash. That evening, after the children had gone to sleep, Elias spread out a small, folded paper across the table. The edges were frayed, smudged with dirt and time. This was my father's, he said. A land certificate for 30 acres near Abilene. Never claimed it. Kenzie traced the faded seal with her fingertip. Why show me now? Because I don't want it, Elias said. I want this. What we've made here. She looked up at him. Then we keep building it. They spent the days before Christmas preparing what they could. Kenzie dyed strips of linen with beet juice and stitched them into ribbons for Elsie's doll. Elias carved a small wooden knife for Elam and wrapped the hilt in braided sinew. They didn't speak of what they lacked, only of what might come next. On Christmas morning, they walked to the neighbor's homestead to collect the hog. Elam carried the sled behind them, his mittens stiff with ice. Elias and the other man shook hands, few words exchanged. The work of butchering began that afternoon, and by nightfall, the smokehouse was already warm with hickory and alder. Kenzie salted the meat by lantern light, her hands moving with practiced care. Elias worked beside her, sleeves rolled, his forearms dusted white with salt. When they were done, he wiped his hands and looked at her across the barrel. You ever think about a church ceremony? He asked. Her hands paused on the cloth she was folding. I haven't let myself. I have, he said. I'd like to stand beside you and say it plain. She looked down at her hands, then slowly met his eyes. I'd like that too. We won't have much for it. We have everything we need, she said. The snow deepened in the weeks after, and the wedding was held on a clear, still day in January. They stood in the parlor of the neighbor's house, the windows crusted with frost, the floor swept clean. A circuit preacher who'd come up from Evanston for the winter recited the vows with a voice like worn leather. Elam stood tall beside Elias, and Elsie clutched a sprig of pine wrapped in red yarn. Afterward, the four of them walked back to the cabin together, their boots crunching through the snow. The smokehouse let out a low curl of warmth, and the horses nickered behind the barn. That night, after the children had gone to sleep, Kenzie and Elias sat at the table, the oil lamp casting its soft glow across their joined hands. "You never asked for anything from me," she said. "I didn't have to," he replied. She leaned in, forehead resting against his. "I didn't know I could be this full and still have room to grow. You'll never have to do it alone again." The fire burned low, but the warmth lingered. Snow pressed soft against the windows, and inside their home there was only quiet contentment. Years passed, not quickly, but with the steadiness of people who knew what it meant to build something with their own hands. The orchard gave fruit by the third spring. The smokehouse held more than one hog come each winter. Elam learned to shape iron under Elias's watchful eye, and Elsie kept a garden that stretched wider each year. Kenzie planted lilacs by the front window. Elias built a bench beneath them where they drank coffee in the mornings, her hand always resting in his. They did not live without hardship, but they lived without loneliness. And that, in the end, was more than either had dared to hope for. Their names were carved into the gate Elias had built, side by side, steady as the wood beneath them. And every morning, the light came up over the ridge, just as it had the day they first walked home together.